Like the song by The Clash, breaking rocks in the hot sun, I fought the law and the law won. When it comes to doing things because you're told you're supposed to do them with no questions asked, that's 100% the time when you should ask about them. And even though these are some laws women had to follow through history, unfortunately, there are some that still exist today. Hi, my name is Jessa. Please join me as we look together top 10 disgusting laws women were forced to follow in history. And before we begin, in the last video I was in, top 10 disturbing moments in history you wish you could forget part 2, I did give you guys a riddle. Did you get it? The riddle was, first you eat me and then you get eaten. What am I? The answer is a fishhook. Your next riddle will be at the end of this video. Number 10, what about my pants? Even today, women can't wear pants in Tucson, Arizona. Yeah, you heard me. And we're starting off really simple and small before we get really aggressive with these laws. These include yoga pants, sweatpants, work pants, jeans, khakis, just all kinds of pants. But why? As Owen Wilson might say. To be more specific, it was illegal for Tuscan residents to appear in public wearing clothing that was not his or her sex. These laws were more pushed in the 18th into the 1900s because lawmakers didn't like the idea of women looking like men. But if you think this doesn't apply now, in Japan, women were only allowed to wear high heels at work and just not sneakers. Because lawmakers there in Japan feel like women are more visually appealing if she looks more uncomfortable 900% of the times in heels. Although women do protest in Japan by wearing whatever the heck she wants, they would still be often looked at with discrimination. In some ways, although the basis of the laws itself seem ridiculous, and in more complicated notions, this affected the biases and basis of sex wearing the opposite supposed clothing like cross-dressing or drag. As lawmakers in Arizona in 2022 had made approval for laws against transgendered youths, has made it more difficult for the LGBTQ+ community from receiving notoriety and support for their identity. Pants or no, you know I'm always here to support people to do whatever they want. Regardless what they say, whatever makes you happy, do it. After all, Marlene Dietrich looks hot in pants. Number 9, I can't check in. If you're an unmarried Qatari woman, if you're under 30, you're not allowed to check into a hotel. While Qatar has taken steps to empower women, like lifting a restriction in 2020 that stated women must have a male guardian permission to get a driver's license, the country still enforces restrictions on women in their laws. According to the Human Rights Watch, the country's system of male guardianship is still a constant thing. In fact, these guardianships allow men to dictate many aspects of a woman's life and is still legal. But in an article in 2022, Qatar affirms the advancement of women is priority of its policies. Third Secretary of Qatar's permanent missions to the United Nations, Sheikha Al-Maha Al-Tahani, confirms that the state of Qatar is pushing for equal opportunities for women in education, employment, and care. In addition, in the initiative, including a series of humanitarian projects, they include scholarships to the Afghani women's robotics teams. So yes, there are Western misconceptions when it comes to stereotypes, but women are really strong over there, and yes, they do face changes, but nothing that won't stop them from fighting for change. Number 8, the right to work. Work was only available to those who had no choice, as their social status prevented them to level up in the ladder to have a better life independently. Even more so those who were labeled as part of the working class, these women fueled the industrial revolutions, making up to 60 to 80% of the workforce in light industries, such as cotton manufacturing. Women that had jobs outside of the home made them less likely to marry, leaving them with no choice but to stay in the undesirable situations that made them undesirable, which is why not a lot of women were allowed to work. In one study by the Buffalo State had noted classing women and children together as helpless creatures needing the protection of strong men, they were indignant at the knowledge that women had to support themselves, that they suffered degrading wrongs as working women. So, for some, they'd have to result themselves into committing to adult work, or even some unfortunate circumstances, be sold into adult work as they were often heavy with debts from predecessors or used as bargaining chips for their partners. Number 7, no education. For women in the Victorian era, as an example, they were received less education than men. They were banned from universities and could only obtain low-income paying jobs, as she was not allowed to follow a profession as they were all close to women. Women of these times couldn't get an education to liberate herself or her children from defamation if the husband no longer sees her as a useful asset. So for women, especially those who could afford it, was raised in a privileged household with financial backings and exceptional family background, her education was only seen as accomplishments. Even doctors at the time believing if a woman studied too much, education would stunt her ability to reproduce, which is wild as hell. And when universities allowed women to attend into lecture halls, their families would actually forbid them from going as they were worried it would prevent them from finding a husband. Although it was widely known more accessibility for women to get an education, there are still parts of this world that women do not have the right to an education. Number 6, we want you. A famous advert in the US, especially during the Vietnam War, was the whole "we want you" from Uncle Sam, and for a woman who served in the military, it must be pretty daunting even now to join since there's still biases regardless where you go. But of course, there was a time where this wasn't legal. Although women have always been associated with the military professions like nursing, they weren't allowed to be active members and many of their positions were unpaid. This changed in 1942 during World War II when the Army was in such dire needs of recruits that they allowed women to join and fill non-combat positions obligations on an auxiliary basis. Eventually, the Army allowed women to formally enlist in the reserves by establishing the Women's Army Corps, or WAC, in 1948. Finally, women could gain a rank, earn benefits, and serve overseas. Number 5. Divorce. While society has come a long way from 1920 when the 19th Amendment was drafted, guaranteeing all American women the right to vote, in the middle part of the 20th century, women continued to fight for legal rights. Filing for divorce without having a claim, fault, or wrongdoing was one of those demands. Divorce was a big topic in the early 1930s to 1970s, and just the concept of it was always left with taboo. Even now, although there is a good chunk of people we know who do get divorced in our personal lives, women initiating the divorce was often rare and if not allowed. Over the decades from 1930 to 1970s, increasing opportunities also arose for highly educated women, but still didn't subjugate them against the violence occurring at home, which is why a lot of women wanted divorces was due to domestic issues, as well as women in the US weren't even allowed to get their own credit card without their husband's permission. In 1937, with the Matrimonial Causes Act, this act allowed, following almost 3 decades of political pressure, allowing women to petition for divorce on the same terms of men for the first time. Number 4. 1777 voted no. Well, as soon as the United States came together after the American Revolution, all states passed a law that took away women's rights to vote. In 1872, a woman by the name of Susan B. Anthony said, "Screw y'all, I'm gonna head to the polls," and she voted anyway. As soon as she did, she was arrested for doing it, and she was also then fined $100, which she refused to pay. Because honestly, work. It wasn't until 1890, the first state of Wyoming grants women the right to vote in all elections. The 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, wasn't ratified until 1920. The law was passed largely due to the efforts of ordinary women who changed the world. Countries like Finland, Australia, Norway, Germany, Russia, and more gave women the right to vote way before the US officially did, but either way, it was still a good first step for many more laws to come. Number 3. Birth control. Despite the overturned rule of Roe v. Wade from 1973 that was placed in the US in 2022, which now honestly just sent us back to 1973, women before and as of recently now are not allowed the autonomy of their own bodies. The first birth control pill wasn't approved until 1960, so at the turn of the century, women relied on methods such as other devices and other protective means, both of which were largely controlled and distributed by men. In 1916, Margaret Sanger decided to do something about that and opened the first birth control clinic in the United States. She was arrested, however, 9 days later, but that didn't stop her from continuing to advocate for women's rights to control over her own reproductive decisions. And the availability of birth control that women enjoy today was due to Margaret, but sadly, the issue now with the court's decision on the US has now placed a lot of women in danger over their reproductive rights. And I must say it, it's only for rich people. After all, if you're a rich guy and you had a mistress and you took her to the doctors for a little visit, that's what you did. And now that the law is overruled, everyone else is going to suffer because of that. But systems will change again, and that's how laws work. I mean, the same year they tried to overrule interracial marriage, so the hell. Number 2. Withdraw consent. In 1979, there was a case on consent that shifted the decisions for North Carolina's Supreme Court Justice. In this situation in North Carolina, a woman cannot withdraw consent, which if you know what I mean by that, then yeah, you know what I mean. In fact, these laws still exist even through our history and to our modern era of date and age due to large issues in human rights violations and violence against women. As this issue is pretty damn big, the fact that these are issues we're still talking about today and is placed as a debate is really disappointing as it focuses on a person's right to consent. If they don't want to do it, you're not obligated to force or coerce them into doing so. So what's going on in North Carolina, and why are you the only state in the US with this law, and why is it still legal? This 40-year-old precedent has attracted national criticism for years, and sadly, these lawmakers always seem to find a loophole, which is very gross. And finally, number 1, why is this still legal? Number 1 is going to be a bit extreme. Well, you know what? Number 1 is extremely disturbing, and although some might say it says women in the title, yeah, well, this law affects young girls throughout the world. There's only a handful of countries that don't specify a minimum age for people to legally marry, but even in countries where there are laws to prevent children from engaging in unfortunate practice, that is still deeply rooted and disgustingly accepted in some cultures. And in some cases, the parent, whose job is to protect their children, consent on behalf of their children. And before some of you say, dang, that's so wild, I'm glad there's nothing like that in the US, well, there is. In fact, between the years 2000 to 2018, there was nearly 300,000 minors legally married, and some of those licenses were so parents could help those who committed non-consensual measures on their child be considered legal. 5 states have no minimum age as of age 0. 2 states have a minimum of age 15, and 23 states have a minimum age of 16, 10 states for both 17 and 18 years old. This is a disgusting and concerning issue as I hope lawmakers take more seriously, as well as you take seriously, as there are many documentaries of young brides and grooms who are forced into a system that failed to protect them. How can a country state they're advanced if they can't even protect the next generation meant to run it? Anyways, that's all for today. You know me, I love ripping into issues that people tend to avoid talking about. After all, when it comes to these laws, they are more than capable of change. That's why people rally, protest, protests, have discussions, push for notions, petition the court systems, and we're all capable of great change. Even though some of these laws are left into our history books, as I said earlier, some of these laws still exist now. And that's a problem. On the bright side, the more we continue to have these conversations, learn the systems, and learn how to fight them, maybe when you fight the law, maybe this time you'll win. So for your next riddle, it goes, which word in the dictionary is always spelled incorrectly? Be sure to put your answer in the comments below, and I'll reveal the answer in the next video. Top 10 disturbing events from the Gilded Age. That's all for today. Thank you for joining me. My name is Jessa. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see your beautiful faces in the next one. Bye.